Hello and welcome to The Last Word. On the day Raghuram Rajan takes over as RBI governor, we ask what are the key challenges he faces and what should he do about them. My guests are the Chief Indian Economist of Barclays, Siddharth Sanyal, the Group Chief Economist of the Aditya Birla Group, Ajit Ranade, Professor of Economics, Ila Patnaik, and the Joint Managing Director of Hero MotoCorp, Sunil Munjal. But first, a brief moment from Raghuram Rajan's press conference earlier this evening.
To the existing traditions of the RBI, which will be the bedrock of our work, we will emphasize two other traditions that become important in these times: transparency and predictability. The Reserve Bank of India should be a beacon of stability as to its objectives. That is not to say we will never surprise the markets with actions. A central bank should never say never. The primary role of the central bank, as these words suggest, is monetary stability, that is to sustain confidence in the value of the country's money. Ultimately, this means low and stable expectations of inflation, whether that inflation stems from domestic sources or from changes in the value of the currency, from supply constraints or demand pressures. As our trade expands, we will push for more settlement in rupees. This will also mean we will have to open up our financial markets more to those who receive rupees so that they can invest it back in. We intend to continue the path of steady liberalization. There has been a fair amount of public attention devoted to new bank licenses. The RBI will give out new bank licenses as soon as consistent with the highest standards of transparency and diligence.
Sunil Munjal, Raghuram Rajan began as governor of the Reserve Bank with that blockbuster press conference, you just heard an excerpt of it, promising a whole range of new and radical reforms, committing himself in the process to greater transparency, better communication, and in fact, in particular, tackling the bad loan problem, improving and enhancing banking, talking about new banks coming on stream as early as January, and even talking about something as innovative as mobile payments. What impact did the new governor make on you?
I think the first and the most important thing was he had a calming effect on the entire system. And this was sorely required right now. Because while there are external problems, there are internal issues, but a lot of the current impressions getting created is coming from emotions, from media, and from the impression that has got created, both by omissions and commissions of government and RBI. So I think he's done a good job in starting off, but he has his work cut out for himself. What we've heard from him are plans and things he would like to do. I certainly hope and I wish him all the very best to actually go out and implement these things. Many of these ideas are not new. They've been talked about for a while, but we've not been able to implement many of them so far.
Absolutely, and I will come in a moment's time to the more concrete, specific challenges he faces. But the interesting thing, Ajit Ranade, is that he had a calming effect by actually announcing a plethora, if not a cascade of reforms. And as he said himself, he said, change is risky, but it's even riskier not to change. And he added, I'm not out to win a popularity sweepstake. Did he fill you with a sense of confidence, or did he make you feel that perhaps he's biting off more than he can chew?
Karan, I rate this first day speech almost like a century on debut. It's not only a century on debut, but it's like a century in the first session of play. It's really a very impressive performance. There was enough content in terms of conceptual content, but also very specific measures which were announced. And some of the things were very remarkable. For example, he made a reference to the fact that there is financial repression in terms of banks' obligations to buy government treasury bonds. He said we will look at that. He also took away the drama of this whole the new bank licensing by saying that if necessary, we can continue to give licenses on tap. So it removes the whole, suspense and this deadline business. And there are several other measures like this. So really, it's quite an amazing speech and quite a high benchmark to now follow up on.
All right. A century on debut, Ila Patnaik, but now, in fact, he has the slog of the rest of the game, and therefore, let's come to the concrete, specific challenges he faces. Would you say that at this moment, as he takes over, the critical challenge is stabilizing the volatility of the rupee?
I think the stabilizing the volatility of the rupee and what his stance on monetary policy is going to be. Because given the growth numbers that have come in during the last week, it's going to be a very big challenge. Do you lower rates or do you worry about the stability of the rupee? Today, last week, and for the last few weeks, actually, RBI has taken a large number of steps. Both the government and the RBI have taken a number of steps which need to be reversed if confidence in reform is to be restored. And those are steps on gold, those are steps on the sharp hike in interest rates that was done. So those steps need to be reversed for restoring confidence in growth and investment. And I think that's going to be a very, very, very big challenge.
Okay. Siddharth Sanyal, in a very real sense, Ila Patnaik has put her finger on the dilemma the governor faces. The rupee is not just under pressure, but that pressure is going to get worse when the Americans start tapering off their quantitative easing, and it will perhaps become horrible pressure if you go ahead next week with military strikes against Syria, kicking up the oil price. In those circumstances, the governor may actually want to raise interest rates in the belief that that would attract funds to India. But if he does so, it will badly damage growth, which has already come down to just 4.4%. And some are predicting that year-long growth could be even as low as 3.7%. So he really does face an acute dilemma handling the rupee and the problem of growth at the same time.
Well, it's a very real dilemma, no doubt about that. Now, I want to mention one point here. Hiking interest rates or monetary policy from the interest rate side cannot be remedy for all evils. This is a very textbook kind of recommendation that to protect or to reduce INR's volatility or the depreciation pressure, you might have to raise interest rates. But in this kind of situation, it can be absolutely counterproductive for the INR. At the moment, looking at our hedging cost, looking at the rate of interest in the global economy, just raising interest rates will not attract flows. What is needed is to be more growth supportive over a period of time. I think he is taking a very pragmatic view in this kind of situation. From his previous communications as well as today, he is trying to be growth supportive over the long run or over the medium run, and trying to devise some more measures like the FCNRB related announcements today, which will be augmenting near-term flows and support INR, rather than going into the interest rate related measures.
Sunil Munjal, raising interest rates is actually a no-no for the governor, and it's very possible that, in fact, he may well come to that conclusion himself. There are two other things that have been suggested for him. Adi Godrej, your colleague, has said that he should perhaps aggressively use the reserves to defend the rupee. The Financial Times on the 1st of September, Gavin Davis, one of England's most famous economists, said that the governor should consider issuing sovereign bonds denominated in rupees to promote capital inflows. Would you endorse those two recommendations?
Let me take a step back first, if you don't mind. On the interest, since you asked that question earlier, I think India has a good case for actually lowering interest, not for raising interest at all. Lowering interest at this stage would spur economic activity, would bring in growth, and that itself would have a salutary impact on the rupee-dollar exchange rate. I'm not sure how many people actually realize that the dollar to rupee was 1-to-1 in 1947.
Oh, no, forgive me, I have to correct you, you're wrong on that, and it's been proven to be the case. The Business Standard in a leader proved it, that in fact in 1947 the rate was just over 3 rupees to the dollar. So let's leave that aside, but carry on with your rest of your analysis.
Right. Yeah. So I think at this moment we need to be careful and not take the typical theoretical economist view and continue to raise interest because inflation is high.
Okay.
And what we are doing actually is we are suppressing the demand. When the problem is actually on the supply side.
What about the other 2 points? Should he go in for rupee-denominated sovereign bonds, and should he go in for using the reserves? Quickly on that.
So I don't think the reserves are all to be used. I think some of it can be used, but I would rather that in a tsunami of the kind we've seen over the last 6 to 8 weeks, it would be smarter to keep your head down, let it blow over as it will, and then at an appropriate time start to use your reserves.
Okay.
As to the bonds, he actually suggested something in effect to use more rupee as for trade, which is a very smart move. The FCNRB and allowing foreign banks to borrow from their own head offices overseas are three things which will have the same impact.
Okay.
So you could certainly supplement that with a sovereign bond, but these three will have the same impact.
Okay. Patnaik, a second challenge that the governor faces is that of inflation. It's already crept up in June to 5.79%, and with the rupee depreciating, and with the government forced to have to hike diesel and perhaps LPG and maybe even more petrol prices to compensate for what's happening to the oil price, the pressure on inflation is going to be upwards. What, if anything, can the governor do about this?
I don't think there's a short-term solution to inflationary expectations today. I think that what he said in terms of that the objective of the central bank should be low and stable inflation is really the question that the country has to face. That today we have given RBI multiple objectives. It has to do many things which are often conflicting, and we've seen in the last few days how trying to achieve multiple objectives with practically one instrument, which is interest rates, is very hard. So what needs to be done is to go the FSLRC way, which has recommended that you need to have a central bank focus on monetary policy, have a clear, defined, measurable objective, and Raghu's inputs into what should be the objective, whether it should be nominal GDP, whether it should be the exchange rate, whether it should be an inflation rate, CPI-based, WPI-based, or whatever, will be an important input. So really one has to think of moving away from the 1934 RBI Act towards a modern central bank where inflation targeting is done, where there is a method to do it, where there are institutions like the Monetary Policy Committee where RBI does monetary policy in an independent way and is accountable for keeping inflation low. So I don't think there are short-term solutions, but I think that Raghuram Rajan can play a very, very important role in finding the new RBI, in actually transforming RBI into a modern central bank which just does exactly that.
Ajit Ranade, his predecessor tackled inflation by periodically raising interest rates. And that certainly has been the policy that the RBI has traditionally followed. Given what you've heard Siddharth Sanyal say, that this will be a terrible mistake, particularly in the context of the depreciating rupee, would you also say it would be a terrible mistake in the context of rising inflation?
Well, Karan, this is the central challenge, the sort of a real test of this new governor, that what was happening during the previous governor's regime is that all these tightening measures were getting undone because of fiscal expansion. So unless you have some cooperation from the fiscal authorities, you cannot be having a tight monetary policy undone by a loose fiscal policy. And this is really the central challenge. Incidentally, the new governor quoted from the RBI Act of 1934 saying, "My primary responsibility is towards monetary stability, which is protecting the rupees in your pocket, protecting the value of your currency in your pocket, both domestic and external. And of course, financial inclusion and economic development is also a priority, but fundamentally it's monetary stability." So I don't think you can afford to go lax on interest rates, much that industry and growth will desire that. But I think, having said that, we are seeing signs that some of the indicators of inflation are softening. And there may be room to actually, if not lower interest rates, to go slow on the hikes. But I think this is the central challenge. And I mean, I don't think that the dharma of central banking is to protect your money. I mean, to protect the money of the country.
Siddharth Sanyal, if some of the indications suggest that inflation is softening, and I will add that there are others who contest and say the opposite, do you think the governor would be well advised to grit his teeth and wait for improved agricultural productivity, which is hopefully going to happen because of a good monsoon this year, to lower food prices, and then through that route lower inflation perhaps by December, January next year?
Well, Karan, there is one big point here. Monetary policy needs to be forward-looking. You cannot wait for an event to happen and then react. At times, we had got moved into that trap in case of several countries, including India, in the past. But we need to move ahead. We have to be a little forward-looking. Okay. I think at this moment, priorities are pretty clear. In the near term, containing the volatility and depreciation pressure in INR is possibly a priority, a very clear priority. Over the medium to slightly longer term, number one priority, once that particular objective is achieved, number one priority should be growth in this kind of a situation, which is faltering very significantly. Inflation pressures in case of India over the long term, you cannot ignore. But at this moment, we are possibly seeing a somewhat benign phase in inflation. Forget the numbers. In spirit and essence, inflation, pricing power, capacity utilization, hike in real estate prices all seem to be pretty benign at the moment.
All right, gentlemen, and forgive me, Ila Patnaik as well. Let's take a break at that point. When we come back, I want to ask a critical question. Behind the concern with the rupee, with growth and inflation, is there a bigger problem that lies hidden? A loss of confidence in the government and perhaps a loss of confidence in the India story? And if that is the case, what can Raghuram Rajan do about it? All of that in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to The Last Word. We're discussing the challenges Raghuram Rajan faces as the new governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Sunil Munjal, if it is the case, as I ended part one, that perhaps the biggest problem Raghuram Rajan faces is a loss of confidence in the government and perhaps in the India story, both at home and abroad, what, if anything, can he do about that?
The reality is, Karan, the fundamentals of India are still quite good. Our impression, which has got spoilt over the last some months, is partially because of the global situation and partially because of what we have done in India, both omission and commission policy and implementation. And it's also our own communication. I think if he continues to communicate in the way he has done today, that would have a very positive impact on the whole system. By the way, the global markets have already reacted positively to him coming in and making this kind of a statement. And also in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we will know enough about what's going on in Syria and also about the quantitative easing. I think his job will become a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more stable from that point on.
All right.
Until then, there is, of course, a fair amount of questions.
Ajit Ranade, you said that this was a man who had scored a century in the very first session. How much is his task made easier by the fact that his track record and reputation is so strong, and some would say so superlative, that he, just by becoming governor, gives people a sense of confidence that perhaps the India story might just be resurrecting itself? Or am I exaggerating when I put it in those terms?
No, Karan, today you're allowed to exaggerate as much because this is day one and it's a debut day. And you must give credit to the government, the same government who has appointed a really excellent person to this job. So they've done, at least the first thing they've done is right. He comes with a pretty impressive set of credentials, but don't forget, he was also the chief economist of the IMF at a time when, the pre-Lehman years. And this is a man who had made a famous speech in 2005, warning Wall Street and warning Mr. Greenspan and others that this is not going to end very well.
All right.
So I think, therefore the world will take notice. And I think you also have to give credit to the fact that his speech today was so lucid. So hopefully all the confusing signals that the Reserve Bank gave out during the month of July, when it wanted to tighten, it wanted to increase interest rates, but very quickly the next day it started going loose. And so I think, if we get a lucid, consistent message and lots of nuts and bolts reforms that he's announced, that's definitely a very good signal.
Ila Patnaik, he was called a Luddite by Lawrence Summers because of that speech that Ajit Ranade referred to, and Lawrence Summers must certainly be biting his tongue for that stupid error. Now, one of the things the Business Standard speculated today, which is very un-Luddite, is that perhaps he'll move quickly to lift capital controls on India Inc. If he does that, would it be, in your eyes, the start of the new RBI that you want to see and you spoke about? A quick answer.
Very much, yes, very much. I mean, first thing to do is to reverse all the capital controls that have been put in place in the last few days. You know, all these silly restrictions on gold, on the currency derivatives, and any other capital controls that have been put in on individuals, for example, of taking so much money out. That's not the reason why the rupee is falling. So absolutely, that should be step one, and it's a step in the right direction because I think he's a man who understands modern finance.
Let me bring in very quickly Siddharth Sanyal at that point, because you represent a British bank, and in a sense, I want to get from you how the first day has gone down with international financial institutions. A quick answer.
Remained a day of excitement for foreign investors, I guess. And they are hoping to see a lot of this kind of measures and a greater granularity in the next few days. Given the fact that the new governor is okay to set very tight deadlines for himself with this kind of exciting and challenging measures, has been a very positive takeaway for all foreign investors.
All right, it's quite clear that Raghuram Rajan has got off to a terrific first day. He now has 5 years ahead, and he has to continue this pace every single day to the end of those 5 years. If there's anyone who can, undoubtedly it must be him. My thanks to all four of you for joining me, and if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.